Olivia Gambelin advises C-suite leadership at Fortune 500 companies on AI innovation that works because it works for people. She delivers keynotes globally on human-centric design as a competitive advantage. She's the author of the award-winning book, Responsible AI: Implement an Ethical Approach in Your Organization. The book is a step-by-step guide through the process of establishing robust yet manageable and ethical AI initiatives for any size organization. In this interview, we discuss values Olivia experienced in her upbringing and education. Olivia shares how she splits her time between Belgium and California. She provides insights about the EU AI Act and her role in Brussels advocating for small and medium businesses. Later, she describes her role in Silicon Valley advising companies and organizations on responsible AI and AI ethics. Olivia offers practical advice for business leaders managing AI adoption initiatives. If these concepts are new to you, you'll get a lot out of this episode. Olivia brings a wealth of knowledge, and it was a delight to speak with her. If you enjoy Work and Worldview, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell a couple friends. It makes a difference. I'm happy to have Olivia Gambelin as my 14th guest on the Work and Worldview podcast. Olivia Gambelin, welcome to the Work and Worldview podcast. I'm so glad you could join us.
Thanks for having me here today, Jonathan.
So as we begin all of our interviews, please tell me a little bit about your life growing up, the values in the home that you grew up in.
It's we're going straight to the heart right away. So I am, my mother's Irish and my father is Italian. So I'm a mix of two of the most Catholic countries in the world, I think you could argue. So I like to joke I had no choice. I was Catholic by force growing up. But my family are practicing Catholics, and it was definitely a part of my childhood that I'm grateful for. I think it taught me a lot of different values. It's an interesting upbringing to have to then move into the tech world where we tend to separate a lot of religion and tech, but it was definitely influential. And I still appreciate the Catholic Church, and I still use it as kind of like rituals as you pass through life with all of the different sacraments and markings of time. I can really appreciate those almost cultural Catholic pieces that I still carry with me and my family.
Now, you grew up in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
So surrounded by tech. So was there an immediate tension there with like being a person of faith?
Not so much, surprisingly. So
Okay.
I think I've been to a good chunk of different denominations for schooling. My middle school was Lutheran. My high school was Catholic. My undergrad was Baptist. So I've seen them all, it feels like. But my high school, for example, we were one of the first high schools that brought iPads into the classroom. My middle school, we had tech classes. We were taking computer classes. So they weren't separated, which was interesting. I think maybe in some of the conversations, there was a bit of a separation between church and state, if you want to joke that way. But being in the Silicon Valley, tech is such a huge part of our culture here that it naturally integrates into everything that we do. That sounds a little bit funny for someone that didn't grow up in this area, but it is like part of the culture you grow up speaking techie.
So as you move through high school and college, obviously now your Catholic values are being, I don't want to say challenged, but just sort of integrated into these Protestant faiths and interactions, right? What did that look like? Was there tension, or did it all kind of blend together nicely?
I think that there were definitely tensions between different denominations, but I am, again, grateful, I think is the right word here, that I was able to experience different denominations. Of course, they're all within the Christian faith, so they're all more or less echoing of each other. But I enjoyed it because I got to see the same root faith. We'll put it this way. I got to see the same root faith from a lot of different perspectives. And I got to experience going to different services, talking with different people that grew up in different faiths. And I mean, over the years now living in Brussels, I encounter people from very, very different lines of faith. And yet there are always the same commonalities and I would say some core values that carry across different faiths and religions that make it interesting. So yeah, there's tensions, but I think in the tensions, that's where the important conversations are had. That's where the growth and development are found.
Ooh, so expand upon that a little bit.
I think for me, coming from the Catholic faith growing up, and then now being introduced and, living and working and having friends and, well, friends that I would call family nowadays from different
Hmm.
faiths,
Sure.
there are aspects around core pieces like loyalty for your family or respect for human dignity that are seen in different ways, that are carried out in different ways,
Hmm.
but we still have the same values at the end of the day. So it may be more conservative or liberal in terms of how loyalty to a family looks like. Some religions are very strict about divorce, for example. Other ones are encouraging of divorce in a different direction when a marriage isn't working.
Hmm.
We're still looking at the same values, we're just realizing them differently. And so when you can sit down and have an open conversation with people about what do you believe, why do you believe it, and get to the fact that it is the same value, it's just being realized differently, that I think breaks down barriers. It feels less like, oh, this is someone foreign, this is something scary, this is something bad. And instead it's like, no, this is another person that I see the commonality. I feel the connection. And I think that is something powerful in a world where we seem to be really good at distancing ourselves and categorizing ourselves and trying to get further and further apart. It's nice to have those connections between each other.
Okay, so let's go back into your personal history a little bit. So we're
Yes.
now around college, beginning your career, right? And I just want you to kind of lay out for us that beginning of your career to today, AI ethicist, serving the EU in Belgium, but
Yes.
also living in San Francisco as well, and kind of going between the tech capital and the EU capital. That's all.
Yes, that's all. It's very simple. So I split my year. I live in San Francisco and I live in Brussels. And the San Francisco side is very much around the cutting edge of development in AI, and Brussels is the cutting edge development of regulation and policy on AI. So it makes for an interesting balance. These two locations definitely have their own bubbles. So you
Hmm.
have the Silicon Valley, San Francisco bubble, and then you've got the Brussels bubble. The papers written about the Brussels bubble effect even.
Really?
Well, yeah, because Brussels is a fascinating place. It's a concentrated it's a concentrated city of a lot of different internationals, and they
Hmm.
all come there, and you've got the institutions, the European Union institutions, where these are people coming from all of the different member states
Hmm.
having to come and agree on overarching regulation from very, very different cultures, very, very different backgrounds, in a way, different values as well, and then having to come and agree, what does it mean to have a European Union value set? Europeans are very value focused and principle focused. So, what does it mean to have an overarching value set here? And the Brussels bubble effect is effectively the idea that when people come to Brussels, they get very, very focused on these regulations and can kind of forget that there is a world outside, that even though you are implementing these regulations, you still have to also ensure that that companies and organizations and so on can follow those regulations.
Hmm.
And sometimes Brussels really likes to some people would say overregulate, and so you get the
Hmm.
Brussels bubble effect, but
Hmm.
can also be said for the same over here in San Francisco, in the Silicon Valley, where you get the bubble effect here of, look, I made this really cool technology, and then no one outside of the Silicon Valley is using it. It's like, well, it wasn't that useful, or it's too technical. And it, of course, when you're outside of an area, say just, even in the Central Valley of California, where people aren't as technically literate, of course they're not going to adopt something that's highly technical. It doesn't work like that. So both of these places can be bubbles in their own right.
So the feedback loop for Silicon Valley is product market fit and profit, right? So it either takes the market picks it up and runs with it or it doesn't.
Hmm.
What's the feedback loop for the EU and their legislation?
Mm, that's a really good question, especially right now on the AI regulation, because Brussels and the EU was really the first regulatory body that started to implement comprehensive digital regulations. So it started more around the GDPR, the General Data Privacy
Hmm.
Regulation, and we've been adding to it. We've got different regulations around the digital economy, around at one point they were trying to regulate crypto. I can't remember if if we went forward with that, but
Yep.
there was that movement there because there was the feedback of people being concerned about their data, concerned about where the technology was headed, and not really knowing how to push back on it. So that feeds into, well, we should regulate this. And then now, typically, I would say what that feedback loop is usually more based on member states. The 26 member states of the European Union, the EU makes an overarching regulation, and then a different member state like Belgium or Italy or France will go and implement it and then give feedback back to the central body about this is how we've implemented this law. This is how it works. This is how we need to adjust it, and so on. Right now, though, with the AI regulation, we're seeing a different feedback loop where the European Union's actually for the first time getting pressured by tech companies
Hmm.
and so there's the different feedback loop.
Mhm.
The AI Act was supposed to go to the member states, and it is with the member states right now, but instead of listening to the member states of how is this implementation going? Do we need to adjust anything? Instead, it seems like the EU is listening to tech companies pressuring, saying this is too cumbersome.
Oh,
So it's
so
a bit of a yeah.
let's just pause there for a second. Could you just expand upon what is the AI Act? Because maybe not everyone's quite as dialed in
Yes.
as you, right?
True. Thank you. Going off on so the EU AI Act is the really, I would say, the first comprehensive regulation on artificial intelligence on a global scale. So what it does is it regulates the development of artificial intelligence. There's a lot of requirements in there about auditing. Within the regulation, you have to classify your AI as between low to high risk. There are some areas of AI that are off limits, like facial recognition,
Mhm.
for example, is, I believe, still in the off limits category.
So, excuse me
And
just a second. Facial recognition's an input, right? So it's actually controlling what inputs can interface with an AI system, or what inputs in general can be used.
so in this case, what it means by facial recognition is yes, you have the input of faces, but the kind of technology that will take, say, a screenshot of your face or a video of your face and then identify that that face is Jonathan or that face is Olivia. So
Mhm.
using your facial structure, your facial geometry to actually identify who you are. And there is concern around this because it is very close to the idea of big brother surveillance or like a police state where
Mhm.
you can have, say, CCTV cameras on the street and you're just going to your local coffee shop. And yet the government knows that you are at your local coffee shop. You specifically, Jonathan, are at your local coffee shop at 8 a.m. each Friday morning because
Mhm.
your face has been identified as you, and that's been
Mhm.
connected to your information. And so it feeds into this concern around something called social scoring,
Mhm.
which
Like in
is
China.
yes, like in China, where
Mhm.
where if you, Jonathan, jaywalk on the way to go get your coffee, then you could be docked. You could have some
Yep.
of your social points taken away, and then
Mhm.
that leads into a lot of these dystopias that we are concerned about. So the European Union, I know social scoring is banned by the EU AI Act, for example.
Okay. Okay. Curious, just because we're talking about inputs, one of the inputs I did want to get around to asking you about was brainwave reading inputs, right? So there's been
Mm.
various sensors developed that read brainwaves. Are those also associated with this act?
In this case, I believe it would probably fall under a high risk classification.
Hmm.
Brainwaves would be considered personal health data and personal health processing, essentially. That is considered highly sensitive because it's relevant to you and your body. There's a lot of different points there about what becomes sensitive data and what doesn't, what becomes sensitive cases. But that, I believe, would probably be considered a high risk case. And
Hmm.
so, in that kind of case, if a company is developing AI to read and process brainwaves, it would be legally required to meet a couple different auditing protocols. There's some standards around documentation. There are risk assessments they need to run. So it's a lot of procedural processing that needs to be done if it's a high risk AI in order for the ability for users to both know that AI is being used, but also being able to push back or request the information for how did the system come to this decision. It's a pretty complex law when it comes to it, but that's one of the examples.
If I may, so I have some experience in risk assessment in the area of financial crime systems. So you've mentioned risk and risk assessments and auditing a couple times now. Tell me a little bit about the risk scale germane to this topic.
I wish that was an easier question because when it comes to AI, there are kind of, I'll call them two schools of thought. I don't know if anyone really else would refer to these as schools of thought, but I see this especially with my work with my clients and then also just on the global conversation, how to actually classify AI risk.
Hmm.
Because you can look at the technology. You can say this is risky technology. So you can say something like AI, computer vision AI. So AI that is used to identify objects in imagery or in
Hmm.
video. You can say, okay, that's high risk. Technically, that's high risk. Whereas there can be uses of that computer vision AI that are very low risk, like using it to identify a hot dog or not a hot dog. That's an
Hmm.
old Silicon Valley joke.
Sure.
It's completely harmless.
Hmm.
That's not a high risk case. So if you're
Hmm.
classifying computer vision as high risk technology, then you have uses of it that really aren't high risk and it seems a little bit ridiculous. Now, the other way to look at it is to actually look at the use cases of AI.
Hmm.
And there, you're not necessarily looking at the technology, you're looking at how are we going to use this technology. So then in those cases, you would be saying, well, high risk use is in healthcare, but a low risk use is in identifying hot dogs. You can have these different uses. It tends to be that we get caught up in looking at the technology first and trying to classify the risk around the technology.
Hmm.
The challenge there, though, is the technology moves too fast. So
Right.
then, actually, this is a great example. When the EU AI Act first came out, generative AI was not included in that act.
Wow.
Then yes. ChatGPT came out and the EU actually had to revise that regulation to be
Hmm.
able to encompass generative AI because the regulation was written looking more at the technology rather than the use case. So
Hmm.
this has been actually a tension, which is why it's a great question. It's difficult to answer because it depends on what regulation you're looking at, what industry you're looking at, what company you're looking at. Everyone will try and have a little bit of a different approach and kind of a mix of these two different directions of use case versus technology and how do we understand the risks of those and then so on. I could draw on for days actually about this. It's
Well, it's
like I said,
fascinating. It's tricky too because my experience in technology has been you develop a product, you develop something, and once it reaches a certain level of complexity, it can be implemented in different ways, right? And people are so creative. I mean, I remember working for a firm, we had this sort of networking product that handled digital video. And the way the engineers with our customers would connect it with other equipment, the way they would configure it, et cetera. It was just fascinating. So you get
yeah,
into this, I think you can only predict so much. And that's kind of what it sounds like the EU is trying to do is predict, look at the use cases. But I do want to get back to risk again. So they
yes.
have a risk scale. So what are they considering risky? It sounds like from what you've said so far, elements of privacy, things that could
Mm.
affect privacy, things that can affect individual identification, but just kind of flesh out that scale for me a little bit. Help me understand what are their concerns and how do they define this risk scale?
Yeah. I think the best way to encapsulate the higher risk end of the spectrum is think about anything that relates to your health and well-being. So
Okay.
your financial health, your physical health,
Hmm.
your mental health, all of that tends to be classified within that high risk end.
Okay.
So that's where we get cases of like unfair processing or bias. That's where we get cases of uh, a company selling health data to insurance companies. Like it's trying
Sure.
to prevent those where
Hmm.
these are aspects that will affect you in your day to day, your quality of life,
Hmm.
and protecting those as high risk, meaning they need to be monitored more.
Hmm.
The low risk end of the spectrum, though, we're looking at things. This is one of the pieces that I think I would slightly disagree with in terms of the approach. What ends up more in the low risk categories are things like recommendation systems. So AI that is built to recommend you, say, your next social media post or
Hmm.
something to buy
Hmm.
or and why I would argue that these aren't necessarily low risk cases is in some cases recommendation systems can actually be used can actually become highly manipulative and lead to different radicalization and things. So, and have been proven to. So things like communication and think like silly videos and imagery, that all falls under low risk
Mm-hmm.
since it's not necessarily directly connected to your health and well-being, although again, we can argue in some cases that it's otherwise. But that is yeah, I think the best way to put it is unless it is directly affecting your health and well-being, it's going to be classified as low to mid risk.
Okay. So the analogs for those of us in the States would be HIPAA information. Sounds like they're curtailing that as an input, or credit scoring information, I guess, as well. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and there's companies can use that input,
Mhm.
but when they use that input, there are a lot of requirements that come along with that. There's a different level
Okay.
of security where you're protecting those databases.
Hmm.
There's processes for consent where the
Hmm.
user has to give consent for those companies to collect and process that information. So it's the higher end risk in those cases. It's not that it's impossible to use that information. It's more the regulation is designed to give the user agency over that information and decide if
Uh,
they would like to share it or not, which is the
gotcha.
important part. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So now in this case, this is the state imposing these requirements on the private sector. So are there sort of analogous or similar law concerning the state's use of these same inputs, tools, and processing? Or is that just completely outside the scope?
Member states or US states?
Member states. Sorry, yeah. Talking about the EU right now and their EU AI Act. Right? But
All good. It's
does it govern the governing, or does it just govern the private sector usage?
no, it governs both private and public, and
Okay.
the member states have to all approve for it to pass. So
Okay.
it's a collaborative effect. It's a collaborative approach to regulation. The different member states of the EU though can enact their own specific regulations as well. So for example, Germany's got a few more stringent, I'll say privacy related regulations that you have to follow if you're operating within Germany,
Mhm.
but for the most part it is right now we're not seeing too many of the member states create their own regulation. It's more their interpretation of the central regulations. Let me give you an example real quick. So, when ChatGPT first came out, the Italian government used the GDPR, I believe it was, to
Mhm.
ban ChatGPT for the first couple of months in the country of Italy. So, it was the only member state that did that,
Mhm.
but they were using one of the central regulations to the European Union.
Does it ever work the other way? Are member states able to relax regulations that come down from on high?
No. So the member states have to follow the European Union regulations. This is
Okay.
one of the pieces that led to Brexit. The UK did not like that and so decided to distance themselves. The nice thing, though, is the member states are very interconnected. And a lot
Mhm.
of these regulations are focused on supporting the European Union's economy. So
Mhm.
when you're part of the EU, yes, there are these regulations that you have to follow, but it makes it very easy to operate within all of the different member states because of the both on the physical and digital economy because of those regulations. Everyone's on the same page.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
What's some of the actual work you've done over there with regard to these subjects?
I am an expert on the small to medium business feasibility. I'm trying to figure out the best way to simply describe this. So we've got large enterprise and corporations, and there's a lot of voices of those lobbying in the EU.
Mhm.
It happens, though, that the small to medium business range, it's difficult to get voices in there about the feasibility of some of these regulations. So I've worked very closely with startups and medium-sized companies. So I have at least some insight if someone is looking at designing a policy that requires very stringent auditing, I can look at that and say, there's no small business that's going to be able to handle that. That is going to be too costly. It doesn't make sense. So I can push back in those directions. And then also, I provide a bit of the contrarian perspective to the risk-based approach
Hmm.
that the European Union has focused on.
Hmm.
So I look a lot at innovation ecosystems and
Hmm.
what's necessary there for the innovation side to Europe's tech landscape to thrive. So I guess the best way to put that is I help behind the scenes influence what kind of thinking goes into some of these policies, just in terms of that innovation and small to medium business range, what matters, what people are going to listen to.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you're bringing the voice of reason for small businesses and medium businesses. That's wonderful. So just give me an idea. Who are your clients? Is it associations of small and medium businesses? Is it particular businesses? What does that look like over there?
I am a big range. I think it's the best way to describe it. I tend to work as an advisor specifically when I'm looking at the small to medium business range. I'm usually more with the associations, or with startups, it's accelerators. Then also, I do still work with a good handful of larger organizations and large enterprise. But when it's small to medium business, it's a lot of the associations where it brings them together. I'm a part of, I want to say, 5 or 6 just different practitioner communities
Hmm.
where these are people that are internal to small and medium businesses and
Hmm.
beyond, that come together and try to sort through, hey, how are we going to manage this? How do we tackle this new incoming AI piece? And
Sure.
so I'll work within those communities as well to
Hmm.
provide insight of what's worked in other companies, what's worked on a larger scale, what's worked on a smaller scale. I think in my position, anywhere that AI touches, I can also touch, which
Hmm.
means I am in a whole lot of different places.
Sure, sure, absolutely. As I did this search on AI ethics, it was so vast. It touched upon so many areas. And it did help me realize, like, when I talked to Olivia, and we were going to do this in the beginning of the call, and obviously I've failed. So, Olivia, backing way up, what is AI ethics for audience members who may not know? Maybe I'll have to cut this and put it at the beginning, or maybe not. I don't know. But what is AI ethics? And then how do you engage if you could? Yeah.
Yeah. So I am an AI ethicist, and the best way to describe AI ethics and the work of an AI ethicist, I used to have to joke, I'm not morally superior than other people. Uh,
Hmm.
When this field was first developing, I would get a lot of pushback from people being like, "Well, who are you to tell me what's right and wrong?" Like, I'm not telling you what's right and wrong. What I do as an ethicist is I understand what value sets are at play, and then how those values influence our decisions and our actions. So, an ethicist is trained to be able to identify, either in a conversation, in an AI system, in a company, what are the values, the principles that are guiding those decisions and actions. Then, off of that, be able to help advise on the decisions and actions needed to align with those values and principles instead of move further away from them. So, it's it's not really a matter of saying you're right, you're wrong, you're good, you're bad. It's
Hmm.
more being able to ask the question of, well, what matters in this instance? If it's privacy of personal data, for example,
Hmm.
okay, how within an AI system, what decisions, actions, what features are needed in order to be aligned with that privacy of personal data instead of running counter to it? So it's an interesting space, I think. All right, I can go very existential here for a second.
Go for it. Definitely. This is the place to do that.
So, you know how we have the physical laws of gravity and so on, that physical
Hmm.
forces and laws of nature that really dictate how we physically move throughout space?
Hmm.
If you take that same similar thinking and apply that to the field of ethics, it's our values are kind of like forces of nature in a way. Values are one of the driving factors in your decision making. So
Hmm.
whether or not you're aware of that. So I like to use the example that I really value freedom. That's something that I often come back towards. Hence why I have made decisions where my career, I am external and I have the freedom to move around. I live in 2 places. I have the freedom to work with different companies. that really is a driving value for me. Now, as I've gotten older, I recognize that more and more. And so when I'm making critical decisions, I know in my mind, well, would this lead to that sense of freedom or would
Hmm.
this run counter to it? Because if I make decisions towards having that sense of freedom, I know I'll be more content at the end of the day.
Hmm.
When I was younger, I had no idea that that this was a driving value, and it was really driving a lot of my early on decisions. But
Hmm.
that is an example to showcase that our values are really these driving forces. They're quite literal forces. And an ethicist's job is to be able to identify and work with those forces instead of working counter to them.
Okay, got it. Got it. So let's use that as a segue. So we covered a lot of your experience and knowledge about things taking place in the EU, but you're also based in San Francisco, where you are right now. So
Yes.
tell me a little bit about, obviously, San Francisco, the hub, the center of, many things AI. Not all things, but many things. Tell me a little bit about your interactions there and your AI ethicist work as well. With everything we just talked about as a great background.
So over here, I
Mm.
am more actually in the startup ecosystem. I think that's also more indicative of the space as well.
Mhm,
Um, Here, it's interesting. I think my work has changed more so than my work over in Brussels has over the years.
mhm,
Because at the start with San Francisco, I used to primarily just be awareness. Like I was trying to raise awareness about ethics,
mhm,
about the importance of responsible practices, about what any of the whole space of AI ethics was, and then
mhm,
also making the case for it as the business case for it. Now people are much more open to that. The concept of responsible AI is a common practice in AI now.
mhm.
So I would say my work here more so is still training and education. I still have a long way to go there, but I'm working more instead on developing new frameworks for AI design that are value driven. So
Mhm.
starting with human values as the impetus for innovation in AI, and how does that actually work in practice from the ground up. So I would say
Wow.
my work here is much more.
Mhm, mhm. So human values, again, we started with this. You shared about the human values that people have in common amongst the conversations in different cultures that are sort of melting pot around or bubble around Brussels, right? What kind of human values do you integrate into your AI ethics work there? Like, be specific. Like, what are you're bringing something to a startup that's using AI, right?
Yes.
And what you're bringing is an additional consideration slash complication slash challenge, right? That they now need to adopt and integrate. Tell me a little bit about what you're bringing to the table there.
All right, bear with me because this has to have two different layers of explanation behind it. So I am an AI ethicist. I also would describe myself as a responsible AI practitioner. And
Hmm.
those are slightly different. In responsible AI, we work on pretty much setting up the infrastructure and operations to develop or adopt AI at scale in a way that you're de-risking that process.
Okay, wait
So
a minute.
it's
Wait a minute. So you're using the
yes,
word risk again. You got to define it, right? Because I'm going to push you on it. So
this is true.
what
Just
risks
taking
are
off.
you D'ing?
So so when we first started in the world of AI, it very much felt like the Wild West. We're like,
Hmm.
not sure what we're doing.
Hmm.
Enough time has passed. We figured out what we want and what we don't want. A great example here is actually around data privacy. So why we started getting in these different regulations, why we talk about consent so often, why people are concerned about their data privacy is the initial practices in AI was I'm just going to take whatever data I can find. Then, as people started to realize what data was being processed, there was that pushback of no, you can't have my health data. No, you can't have the data about, my sleep cycle. You can't have like it felt like an invasion of privacy. And so we began to realize, okay, there are some very clear lines here that we can't pass. That
Hmm.
is if we start to pass them, then we are going counter to cultural values. We're going counter to individual values. We're going counter
Mhm.
to company values, so on.
Mhm.
Uh, so in the world of responsible AI, we have some core set principles. These are probably ones that you've heard of, referenced: privacy, transparency, accountability, autonomy, fairness. These are ones that you're going to hear quite often in reference to AI. These are the best way to describe it are the standard baselines, standard basic
Mhm.
practice
Mhm.
that have been developed over time to show these are the principles that need to guide the development of AI. Just like in the medical field, we've got the Hippocratic Oath. There
Sure.
are clear set values and principles for how anyone in that industry needs to operate. We have similar in the world of AI.
Mhm.
Now, so we are de-risking in accordance to those principles, but we're also de-risking. This is why you can go really, really deep, really fast. We're also de-risking the development and adoption process. So when it comes to AI, there's a lot of moving pieces. It's a
Mhm.
whole change management process you have to go through. What responsible AI does is set the infrastructure so that you know what's happening. You know what the right steps are, the right checks have been done, crossed all of your T's, dotted all of your I's. That's like responsible AI. You're being a responsible adult. You're doing what needs to be done in order to achieve the outcome that you want to, or just achieve functioning AI at the basic point. So that's the responsible AI side. When I'm working with that responsible AI hat, I am very focused on internal infrastructure and operations, creating workflows and frameworks so that teams are aligning on different principles, are following industry standards, are following these baseline, really just these baseline acceptances for what it means to bring AI to the market or to use AI. That's the responsible AI side. So those principles, and you'll notice I'm calling them more principles and less values, um, because I like to call them AI virtues. Which, if we talk more about ethics from a philosophical standpoint, that'll also make further sense. But AI virtues, meaning these are things that we expect AI to do. These are like when you're on a website, if you click on a button, you expect that button to lead you to another page on a website.
Mhm. Mhm.
When you're using AI, if you click, no, I do not consent for my information to being shared, then you expect for your information not to be shared. It's
Right.
basic expectations.
Right. So, in the responsible AI side, you referred to we, so kind of who's we, and you referred to, in effect, like a doctrine, a dogma, a set of principles. What exactly is that? Is it some objective thing that others could find out on the web somewhere? Is it something you're bringing to the table uniquely and privately in your engagements?
Okay. So when I'm saying we, I'm talking about my just fellow responsible AI practitioners, people that work in this industry. We all kind of know each other, or at least we used to. The space has really expanded, but early days, those of us that were, I mean, vanguards to this industry,
Uh-huh.
we all knew each other. We all call each other up. I still meet with a group of about 100 of them once a year. We all get together um, over in the UK, and we sit around the table and share our horror stories and our victories. And
Okay. Wow.
as an industry, it's actually it's a beautiful one to work in because you get to work alongside some amazing people. So I've collaborated with all sorts and shapes and sizes. So I quite often talk about it in a we factor because of that community behind it. In terms of the principles themselves, so you can find them actually in a couple different places. There is a list of 7 in the EU AI Act, which is where people usually point towards.
Mhm.
But these same principles show up in all of the different global policies on AI, which
Mhm.
is why I mean it became the standard. So you will find transparency on the policy for, well, I'm not sure what policies the US has at the moment, but at one point in time, there was a policy in the US where
Mhm.
transparency was on that.
Mhm.
There was transparency on the EU one, there's transparency on the Beijing one. So
Mhm.
how it's enacted changes in the different cultural contexts,
Mhm.
but you do see these common principles that exist across the board. And they are also, each one of them has a very rich depth of practice underneath it. So transparency and explainable AI, that's an entire field itself. Fairness and bias mitigation, that's an entire field itself. These are very technical focuses. There's people that specialize their entire career in one principle, but they're across the board. So if you wanted to find the most common ones, I would say look at the EU AI Act. That's the one that people tend to refer towards. They're not ones that I hold secret within my practice, but when I do work with companies, one of the first steps when I work with my clients, one of our first steps is to create their value set, their core value set. Those principles, those ones that exist in the industry, those become one important input to creating that value set.
Got it. I don't know if this is an appropriate moment or not, but one of the questions I've had is, we became familiar in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so with this concept of UX dark patterns, right?
Mhm.
And these were patterns that were obviously manipulative. And we've seen states attorney generals here in the States, bring up cases against various companies for crafting those and implementing them on children, et cetera. Are there emerging AI dark patterns? I mean, obviously AI could leverage those, but I mean, are there things that are sort of unique to AI that you would say are analogous or equivalent to UX dark patterns?
Mm.
That question makes sense.
I'm following you. I think I would say that the UX dark patterns definitely transfer into the world of AI first and foremost. But I would say yes, there are aspects to dark patterns in the world of AI that, ooh, I mean, AI can help create them, but then I think the interesting thing about AI is it finds them. Very it Okay, let me give an example here. So we talk a lot about fairness and bias mitigation, especially in responsible AI. And the case that you'll usually hear it brought up in is cases around hiring and needing to eliminate bias in the hiring cycle. Now, AI, if you are feeding input wise all of this historical data of, say, your company X or company I or whatever, you're feeding it all of your historical data on all of your hiring, your previous hiring processes and who was a successful applicant versus who wasn't and so on. You may be looking at that saying, hey, we're all good, we're fair in our hiring processes. And then you bring AI in, you feed it all of that data, and all of a sudden you are seeing that there are, let's say, no women making it through to the second interview. I'm like, well,
Hmm.
what the heck happened here? It's clearly the AI that's biased. No, the AI is doing its job. It's found one of the kind of, I'll call them like dark patterns that exist in our human behaviors. So it does a great job of finding pieces about our human and our day-to-day practices that maybe we would like to change or we didn't know were there. So I think
Mm.
one of the differences is AI can very easily pull these out, especially in places that we weren't necessarily aware of them existing in the first place.
Mhm. So can echo inherent historical biases that because of the data it's being trained on.
Yeah, that's one example of many.
Feel free to offer more, or we can go over to ethics, AI ethics.
Let's go over to AI ethics. I think
Very well.
that one's fun. That
Go
one's
for it.
fun. Responsible AI is a fascinating space,
Mhm.
and it does work hand in hand with AI ethics. But AI ethics is really where I get really excited.
Okay. All right. Let's go.
So you had asked me earlier about what kind of principles or values. What am I doing when it
Mhm.
comes to AI? So responsible AI, right? We've got our basic standards. AI ethics. What I actually work with are human values. So what I mean by this is those principles that I was talking about in responsible AI, like transparency and privacy and accountability and agency. I'm not going to sit here and say, Jonathan, I'm so happy that you're transparent and that you are private and that you are you have agency. Like that just feels weird to be like, oh yeah, Jonathan, he's got great values. He's very private. That doesn't make sense. In the world of
Mhm.
AI, those are standards that we want out of AI.
Mhm.
However, I will sit here and I'll say things like, Jonathan, I appreciate that you are honest. I appreciate that you are curious. I appreciate that you are compassionate. These are human values. So, values that we want to either have ourselves or see in other people, not necessarily what we're looking at AI. My
Mhm.
work in AI ethics is looking at how do we design systems not so that AI has these values, but that AI creates the environment in which we as people get to have these values. So I use curiosity actually as a great example here. It's also one of my favorite values to work with.
Mhm.
My end goal is not to make AI more curious. My end goal is to make AI that enables me, the user, to be more curious. So it's crafting that user experience in a way that creates the ability for human values to flourish and specific ones at that. So that's my work in AI ethics, and those values can be very different and look very different. The exciting part of how this works in the market, and then I will pause because I know I'm throwing tons at you right now. But the exciting thing about how this works in the market is people make decisions based off of their values. So they're looking for companies, they're looking for tools, they're looking for AI that helps reflect and emphasize those values. So it's really creating AI technology that's got a deeper connection and purpose rather than just being a cool tool. It actually creates a deeper sense of purpose for the user when they get to use it, not because of the tool, but because of who that user gets to be when using that tool.
Hmm. Very interesting.
Okay.
Let's back up a little bit to curiosity. So the way you describe curiosity is a little abstract. So
Yes.
let's put some legs on it. Well, you do an engagement with somebody. How does how does that actually work? How does that unfold? That you're facilitating user curiosity. Help me understand that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I use something called values based AI innovation. It's a working framework that I have right now. It's still early days. So I think if you talk to me a year from now, it'll probably look a little bit different. But it's my basic working framework at the moment. And it's got 4 steps to it. It's just very simple. First step, you ask, what's our driving value? What matters here in this case?
Uh-huh.
So in this case, it would be saying curiosity. Curiosity. We want curiosity. Great. Next step would be to ask the question of who needs to experience this value. So let's say that we want curiosity and this we're looking at higher education. So we're in a university setting.
Uh-huh.
Well, who needs to experience that curiosity? Well, we want our students, specifically, let's say our graduate students, to experience curiosity. Great. That's step 2. Step 3 is what is needed for that person, for that user to experience that value. So, what we're asking here is what do master's students need to experience curiosity in the classroom? And you can answer something like, well, what is needed for them to experience curiosity is, let's say, different scenario cases for their classes. Maybe you can say they're in economics. We need different scenario cases and we need example scenarios from different cultures and different parts of the world. And that's what's going to help those master's students experience curiosity. That's step 3. And then only at step 4 do you ask the question, how can AI support that need?
Uh-huh.
And then what you're looking at there is, well, okay, if you need different case scenarios, you can use AI to help, say, generate those different case scenarios. So in this case, it's not, you didn't start with AI going, okay, we're just going to have AI generate a bunch of cases and their solutions, and then the students are going to have to read that and done. No, we work backwards. We said, we want to enable curiosity. We need the students to experience that. What do they need in order to experience that curiosity? And then how does AI support that? So it makes AI the secondary character and it makes the
Uh-huh.
value the primary one.
Uh-huh.
And so in that case, it creates a different depth. There's a different intention coming to the use of AI. And also it creates a little bit of it does create different outcomes. You're not just throwing on a solution. You're starting by finding a problem, or not necessarily a problem, but an area that can be strengthened. And then you're fitting AI to it instead of having to fit yourself to an AI solution.
Right. So as you're sharing that, I'm seeing analogs between the sort of standard use case, as a I want to, etc. Given when then for validating.
Yeah.
So then, where does this get implemented? So this sounds like you'd be engaging with a university, right, that has graduate students that's implementing an AI system of some sort, or just help me understand the context a little better.
Yeah, that's one case. Like I said, this is still a new framework, so I'm still earlier days. It
Hmm.
tends to work better with companies that are B2C. So basically companies that are bringing AI solutions to a market.
Okay.
I would say in that it works better for B2C, or it works really well for a company, for a university, for even an individual that's looking to adopt AI and trying to
Hmm.
understand what's the best use case. So
Hmm.
really it's looking at use case design, and it's using that as the driver for how are we going to incorporate and adopt AI rather than starting with the technology and that point.
That sounds fantastic. It sounds like it really could expand into a lot of different places. As a parent, I'm thinking like, I could see parents wanting to use a framework like that for defining things.
Yeah.
Obviously, anyone with administrative oversight of children would be very concerned about could extend that sort of framework as well. Are you engaging with any clients on this particular thing just now, or is this like right out of the frying pan?
I'm engaging primarily in an academic setting right now on the values-based AI innovation,
Hmm.
only because it's still very new.
Okay.
So I'm running a lot of different trial cases at the moment to
Hmm.
gather information and data and fine tune it, trying to keep it as simple as possible. So not overcomplicating it, but make sure that it functions seamlessly for people. So
Hmm.
that's still on the newer side. That's my cutting edge research.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic. Tell me a little bit about recent history in the AI ethics side in Silicon Valley.
Well, I would say that it was ignored for a while, then sort of started making its way around some of the outer edges of conversations. And now, since ChatGPT came out,
Mhm,
it's been a forefront of conversations
mhm,
because with ChatGPT, it became, and all of the different frontier models that followed after ChatGPT, it changed from AI being something that runs in the background that, only a few people really interact actively with these systems to something that anyone can use
mhm,
and that we're seeing large scale large scale consequences from.
mhm,
So it's taken a forefront of the conversation. The interesting thing about the Silicon Valley when it comes to AI ethics is there are a lot of existential conversations, and it can lead quickly into effective altruism, which is, I would say, has a larger community here in the Valley. This is where I'm bringing in my criticism. It tends to remain on that existential playing field of long-term existential questions instead of looking at current decisions and current challenges. It's harder to get those actions and conversations to stick, where it's a lot easier to talk about, well, what's going to happen when AGI takes over, because
mhm,
those kind of conversations are looking big picture of like
mhm,
working with the assumption that AGI is possible and is in the near future.
mhm,
It's looking at conversations around longevity, so extending life beyond, say, our current limits.
mhm,
It looks at, when we have the overlords of AI, what do we do from there? Um,
mhm,
which are good conversations to have, but to me, those should be the fringe conversations, not the other way around.
mhm. Be explicit in what do you feel the conversation should be more centered on?
I think the where conversations need to be more centered would actually oh there's so many pieces. Okay. Um I'll take this route. Obviously, I would love human values to be more at the center of the conversations, but
Mhm,
I think right now one of the biggest pieces that's missing from any of these AI conversations is what's the point of it? I know that sounds very a little bit sarcastic in terms of a question, but we have all shapes and forms and sizes of AI solutions. We
Mhm.
have enough solutions. What we don't really have are the problems. And it sounds kind of funny to say that, but we, in a way, jumped over the need to actually sit down and understand what actually is our need. What problems do we want to solve? What problems are worth solving? What needs exist in our natural state of human being? And then start from there to say, okay, can AI actually support this? And I like to use the word support and not solve
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
AI, the most important factor of AI is the human, and it's a supporting tool to help a person solve something, not solving for a person. Versus right now, it's like, let's make another AI solution. We can do this. We have the data for it. Let's make it.
Mhm.
And then you end up with these solutions that people have to retrospectively try and fit themselves as a problem to,
Mhm.
which just ends up creating more problems. So I really think that the conversation needs to be, what are our problems? What are we trying to do with this? It's fascinating technology, but did we really need more solutions to generate meme videos? No. Was that the purpose of this? No. So that's where I would say the conversation needs to be shifted to is what are what are our problems?
Yeah, Olivia, that's it's both profound because of the moment we're in, right?
Yes.
And the fact that it's AI and AI is touching so much, and yet it's also like we could go back 5, 10 years and see the
Yep.
same challenge in technology, right? It's like I have a solution. I made a thing that does this, and look how great it is. Okay, but like, are people asking for that? Wow, it's really interesting how it like comes full circle this way, right? Anything else you want to share on AI ethics? I have a couple other questions for you.
I actually, I'll share this piece. One of the biggest challenges we have to AI ethics, and I think this also carries in responsible AI too, is this idea that it needs to be all or nothing, that we need to be perfect.
Mm,
AI is black and white. Ethics is notoriously gray. It always depends. We're looking at different scenarios. You have to look at the context. You have to look at so many different factors to determine what is the best decision to make so
mhm,
that you better align with your values. And it's something that does require a degree of trial and error. And that trial and error is not a bad thing. If you make a mistake, that's not the bad part.
mhm,
It's when you don't accept and say this was a mistake and go back and fix it, that's when we start to end up in the challenging spots. But understanding that AI ethics, it's not all or nothing.
mhm,
It's a muscle. It's a habit that you build up, and you're not always going to get it right, but over time you will work towards that better alignment with the values of your company, with the values of yourself, with the values of your community, your culture, your
uh-huh.
market. It's a process. It's not that you are a bad person if you make a wrong decision. It's new technology. We're all trying to figure it out.
Mhm. Good advice. Good advice. So you may have just answered it, but I did want to sort of position for you. Say I'm a CEO or a CTO
Mm.
or I don't know, maybe someone with, profit and loss responsibility director at some organization. What what do you as an AI ethicist want to raise awareness for me in one of those positions?
Yeah, I would say two come to mind immediately. One I've kind of already touched on, and that is around the understanding your problem. I usually just call it know your need. So when it comes to either developing or adopting AI, the most important thing is to know your need. What are you
Mhm,
actually using it for? AI can get very expensive, very time consuming, and very risky very fast if you don't actually know your need. So that is, I would say, one of the first steps. But then probably one of the second this the second thing that comes to mind here and is very relevant to the ecosystem today, where you have all this fear of people losing their jobs, fear of AI taking over their work and so on. We're automating pieces out, especially in leadership's position. They have a lot of pressure on that right now where they're losing good talent, or how do you attract talent, or how do you keep employees from sabotaging an AI project because they're afraid of losing their job and so on.
oh, wow.
It's I've seen all shapes and sizes. I think one of the most important conversations to have in leadership is to actually sit down with your team and ask a very simple question. And that question is, what brings you joy in your work? So,
Mm,
what part of your job do you find fascinating? What makes you excited? What brings you joy in what you do? And sit down with your team, have them write it out, have that discussion. You are going to see patterns with different roles. There are patterns for pieces that people really love.
mhm,
And as you have that, you write them down, you go, okay, this, I like this. This is more the phrasing that I use. You say, okay, these parts that bring you joy, those are sacred. AI doesn't touch that. And what that does for people is it creates that sense of relief. It's like, oh, the thing that I actually enjoy doing, I don't have to automate it. I don't have to hand it over to a machine, because it's this idea that we need to put AI everywhere. But then you have people sitting there going, but I love doing this. I don't want to lose it. And so begs the question of like, well, then don't. Why? Like,
mm,
I'm a writer. I use AI to write marketing material because I wordsmith too much and it takes me forever to write a one pager that should take me 15 minutes. So I use AI in that case. But for
mhm.
me, when it comes to writing my content for my social channels, for my newsletter, for my books, that's sacred to me. That is a sacred process that I enjoy. And sure, it's probably not the most efficient one, but I find so much joy and purpose in that process that AI doesn't touch that for me. And I don't want it to. I don't need it to. That's not a place for it. But I can use AI to support me in generating a quick marketing one pager so that I can go back to writing the things that I really want to write. So it's that idea of support again.
I like that a lot. So do a joy inventory of your employees.
It helps. It helps so much.
That's great advice, Olivia. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Olivia, this has been an amazing conversation. I just want to thank you so much for uh, coming on the show, and I certainly hope we can revisit this because the way things are changing. I think it'd be really great to touch base again in the probably not too distant future.
Likewise, Jonathan, there's the space, there's always something going on.
It certainly is, and you're right there in the middle of it right now. So thanks so much for coming on and sharing, and I look forward to sharing this with the broader audience. So it's going to be awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
So if someone wants to work with you, what's the best way to reach you?
That's right. Smoke signals, carrier pigeon. I'm kidding. No, you can find me at oliviagambelin.com. That's probably the best place to reach out to me. I've got a couple contact forms. You can message there. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and message me there. I do eventually respond, although I need to give that with a warning signal that it may take me a month or two to get back to you on LinkedIn. So my website's actually the best place to reach me. You can also find my newsletter, as well as, well, I guess I should start saying my YouTube channel now too, since
Mhm.
that's going to have a lot more going through it in this new year. You can find that all through my website.
Okay. And there'll be links to all those in the show notes. Last question, I almost forget. What brings you joy in your
Yeah.
work?
Okay, I'll give you a little bit of a different answer here.
Okay.
'Cause I do a lot of professional speaking. I'm on stage a lot. I get to see and hear and speak to thousands and thousands of people each year. It's part of my work as, I guess you can call it a thought leader. I still always cringe when I say that word, but it's something that I do. It's one aspect of my work. And actually something that really brings me joy in all of that work is the moments of connection with people. So when I am at an event and I've given a talk or I've sat on a panel or someone's read my book and they come up to me and they're like, thank you. This is like, I needed to hear this. Or
Yeah.
um, I think what I do in terms of my thought leadership is as I try and give permission to that almost kind of contrarian thinking where someone goes, it's not that I don't like AI. I just don't like the current evangelist AI needs to do everything. I kind of want something where me as the human, I'm the main character and I want to focus on something that has more purpose to it. And that's really what I try and capture with my writing and my research and my content. And so it brings me joy when someone reads that or hears me and they go, I'm not alone. This is okay. I'm not crazy. I can actually sit in both of these worlds. This is something that I needed to hear. Those moments of connection and maybe inspiration, I guess, that's what really brings me joy and why I keep putting myself out there, because I know I'm just with my content and my thinking, I'm not an original thinker. I'm just listening to what everyone else is whispering about and needed someone to say it on a stage
Mm,
and feel validated in that process.
mhm,
So
mhm.
that I think really brings me joy.
Thank you for sharing that. You referenced a book you've written. What's the name of the
Yes,
book?
it is called Responsible AI. Implement an ethical approach in your organization. That was my first book.
Okay. First, meaning
Yes.
more on the way?
Yes, actually.
Give us a little hint.
Well, I can give you the working title.
Okay.
So my next book that is underway, the working title is Not Every Solution Has a Problem. And it is all around that discussion of, hey, how do we actually find the problems worth solving
Mm,
with AI? And the core of that book, I am talking to everyone and anyone outside of tech. So I'm talking to all shapes and sizes of people and how they find problems in their work that is very human, and
mm.
translating that over to how do we do this then in the digital world.
Very interesting. Okay.
It's the foreshadowing.
Keep us posted. Then any other books by other people that you might recommend to the audience?
I've got um I've got a couple. So You Are Not a Gadget. I think Jaron does a great job of capturing how we as humans are not just another step in the technical development process,
Mhm.
but that there are aspects of humanity that can't be translated over into the digital world, and that's a good thing. So I would definitely highly recommend that book.
Did you say Jaron? Jaron Lanier?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Linear,
Yeah.
thank you. I notoriously I cannot remember names. You
That's
know,
all right.
people there's some people that are face blind. I'm name blind. I can't. It's
I
still working
forget
on it.
names the moment I need to introduce two people. The second they come, the two people I'm really excited to introduce to one another, the moment they're standing face to face, my brain goes blank. I don't know why that is.
Exactly. Like, oh, um, I'll actually recommend there are tons of amazing books on
Sure.
responsible AI and ethics. I'm recommending a couple ones that sit maybe outside of the radar. I've got another one and I forget the author's name. I told you
That's
I'm
all right.
name blind.
That's okay.
But the book is called Quality Land.
Okay.
And I know the author is actually a German comedic,
Okay.
but think of it as like if Amazon Prime took over the world and
Whoa.
the main character, I'm not giving anything away. The plot of the story and the main character is the whole plot of the story is following this main character who gets sent something that he, for the first time in his entire life, he goes, I know I don't want that. And so the whole book is him trying to return this item. And I know it sounds funny, but I think it's great light reading because it's taking something, it's making you question like, okay, what do I know about my own self versus what do I follow algorithms? Where is that line drawn? And at what point in time do I say enough? At what point in time do I say, okay, I know this and I have the power of agency of myself versus I'm confused and worried that like I'm missing something that the algorithm is showing
Yeah.
for me. I think it's fantastic to
Yeah.
highlight that very deep existential debate
Yeah.
in a very, very entertaining setting. So I would actually recommend that book too.
FOMO versus contentment for sure. We had some pretty deep conversation with a group of 20 somethings my wife and I work with about that subject when studying the book of Matthew. This has been a fantastic interview. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.